Welcome to the Hub. We're glad you came by. I'm Garth Lobin, and since October is Cybersecurity Month, we're going to devote today's show to cybersecurity in AV. If you're catching this live, we'd like to have you join us and engage with the stream. If you're logged into YouTube, you can post a comment or question for our panelists, and we'll grab it and post it on the screen. Our social media team will also be monitoring our LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter accounts, so share your comments wherever you're watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this from Atlona. My first guest today is Iftekhar Hossain. He's the Director of Quality at Panduit. Welcome, Iftekhar. Okay, as we wait for Iftekhar to come on. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Glad to be here. So as Garth mentioned, I'm Director of Quality at Panduit. I have been with Panduit for 5.5 years. And as part of my job also, we have formed a security group really to focus on implementing secured and best practices in designing and developing our products. So we'll be very much interested to share some of our learnings and what we are doing at Panduit.
Great to have you. And from Level 3 Audiovisual, Paul Konikowski joins us. He's their cybersecurity architect. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks. Like you said, I'm their cybersecurity architect, which is a newer role that was put together this year. It's a mix of internal cybersecurity, making sure our own processes and our people and our policies are up to snuff and watching out for threats, bit of policing, and then externally, involving getting involved in conversations like this and seeing what other people in the industry are doing.
Well, it's great to have you. Our next guest is Frank Petakawa. He is technical sales engineer at Audinate. Hey, Frank, how are you?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for the invite. It's great to be a part of this very illustrious group of people. My name is Frank Petakawa. I'm a technical sales engineer at Audinate. I've had a lot of experience in the audiovisual industry, but my background is in IT and cybersecurity. So when given the opportunity, I love to come on shows like this and advocate and talk about the importance of IT and security as the convergence, which I believe happened many years ago, but a lot of people are adopting now. We need to step up our game.
Absolutely. And the final guest on the panel is Mark Okern, solution architect at Yorktel. Excuse me. Welcome.
It's morning. We haven't had enough coffee yet. That's all right.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there at Yorktel.
Yeah, so I've been in the collaboration space since I'm going to date myself here badly, since the ISDN days before we were worried about all this stuff. And so, over at Yorktel, it's interesting because, I recently joined. I think for anybody who's followed me on social media knows I made a transition, over the last few months, and I've been with Yorktel for it's about 6 weeks now. But we've gone, we've done that transition from AV provider into the IT space. And obviously with cloud and everything else, cyber's, been a huge part of it. But for anybody who follows me, that along with Paul and Frank and everybody else, I've been one of the voices railing about cybersecurity very loudly to anyone who will or won't listen.
Nice. Well, as we've brought everybody on screen, let me give a little background. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the U.S. government, along with the Biden administration, has designated October as a time for the public and private sectors to work together to continue raising awareness about the importance of cybersecurity and to equip the American people with the resources needed to be safer and more secure online. And with that background from the U.S. government, Paul, let me start with you. At a high level, what does cybersecurity mean for us in AV and enterprise?
At a very high level, it's how our systems are connected to the internet and local networks and securing them. Um, because we can just go back not that long ago when almost none of our equipment had a LAN port, had anything to do with the internet other than video conferencing. And so as LAN ports have shown up on our equipment as they become controlled over IP, and generally our systems are now touching client networks. They're not as isolated as some of us wish they were.
Mm-hmm.
We're part of the web, and the bad actors find their way. We've learned, through the back doors, including through maintenance connections,
Mm-hmm.
Through third-party vendors who get hacked, and they may have access to a system. So that's what it really means to us. It's not just about network security. We have to think about our clients' privacy,
Mm-hmm.
all the way down to the gear level. I would say, AV was kind of blind to it for a number of years, and then a few years ago started becoming more aware, partly by force. There was a law. You talked about the federal level. California passed Senate Bill 327 a few years ago, and a few people started writing about it in the industry. To give props to Josh Srego, really shedding some light onto it very early about how much this would affect the AV industry, because what it was requiring, and I'm sure some other folks can speak to this, was basically that our devices could no longer have these shared default passwords, 3, 4, or anything like that. And suddenly, manufacturers started to react, and either had to have a unique password, or had to have something that was prompted where you had to change it. And that, I'd say, that really started the conversation of security in AV. In my opinion, there was a couple other incidents, but that's the beginning of it for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's put a dollar figure on this. I pulled up a recent stat from Accenture, and it really puts a cost to what we're looking at for cybersecurity. So you can see here the growth of cybersecurity crime costs, and this is what companies are having to face. So if you look at a 3 trillion figure back in 2015, and it predicted that the cost of cybersecurity crimes to companies will be somewhere in excess of $10.5 trillion in 2025. So right there, that I think points why we all have to pay attention to it. Now, granted, we're talking about the AV industry today, but if you look at all of our, parent companies, all of the customers that we serve, and Paul, you bring up something really interesting, and I think that's a good place to start. You talk about, cybersecurity as we look at the equipment that we're putting onto the systems. And Iftekhar, I know that you spend a lot of time looking at how to keep our customers' networks and cyber security infrastructure safe. And part of that starts with the equipment. What are some of the things that you look at when you're making sure that the equipment is, for lack of a better term, intrinsically safe, or at least able to make a network safe from the equipment standpoint? I think we may have lost audio on Iftekhar. Are you there, sir?
Yeah, so I just want to start expanding on Paul, as he mentioned about the proposition, the 327, really having like non-default password or a unique password for every device. So a little bit background on that. So let's say a manufacturer is manufacturing a huge number of devices, and we used to ship all of them with the default login and password, maybe admin, Panduit 123, whatever. But the problem is if somebody can actually break into one of those equipment, they actually compromise every single device that's coming out of from this manufacturer, right? So as a result, we said, okay, this proposition is really going to help because you are locking down at a device level, right? So if somebody can get hold of one of your camera, the same approach will not apply to compromise another camera because your password is different, right? So in terms of product design and development, again, we have formed a group. We call it SSG, Software Security Group. really looking at software and firmware and how we can tighten our intelligent products. As Paul mentioned, like all of these products that we are releasing now are somehow connected to the internet, and they have a lot of rich feature like a firmware and software. You have a lot of doors basically that you can get through this device once you are connected in the network. So how do we design a product that our customers will feel safe to deploy in their environment? It can be data center, like a power distribution unit, UPS. It can be enterprise. It can be even audio visual, right? Um, so some of the basic concept there is really following a secure software development lifecycle or pharma lifecycle, where we start with training our people in terms of what security means for each of the different people who are in that role. Let's say, what does it mean for a product manager that they need to bring product like requirements in terms of security? What does it mean for designing a product? Right? What are some of the concerns that we need to have, and how do we mitigate them? How do we implement, code it, right? So in terms of coding, a heavy emphasis on that, right? Like writing secured code, uh, doing like secure code reviews, um, and then implementing different types of tools that can help us
Mhm.
to do this kind of reviews, like secure static analyzers, right?
Mhm.
And then ultimately implementing, and then also make sure like our devices have secured boot, because sometimes you can actually let the device boot in a different way than it's supposed to do and do something different, right?
Mhm.
And then finally ending up with some of the different types of testing or penetration testing you can do. A lot of tools we use. Some of the most popular ones that we have in our belt is like Web Inspect, Nessus, and a number of tools. So we use them to again kind of hit it from the API level, from the web layer, from ports and different kind of things, right? And trying to understand like even after we have designed, implemented, did all this secure coding, best practices, code
Mhm.
signing, what else is out there from a user interface that people can get into. And one more point I just want to make before kind of hand it back to Garth is like the threat modeling.
Mm.
So we also look at the product and kind of see like what are some of the entry point we have, how an attacker can actually get into my system, and what can I do to close every single door as much as possible. Right?
Mhm. Now, Mark, we talked about threat modeling just the other day and risk assessment to systems. So now that we've kind of covered what has to go in to make a product able to be a good actor on a network if it's set up correctly, what are we looking at from the point of threat modeling for the overall system design, and how we have to approach cybersecurity when we put systems together?
Yeah, I mean, and Paul, you can probably speak even more on the device side of threat modeling. For me, where a lot of the danger comes into this is and where the difficulty comes. So I come from not just our side of the table in the industry, but I've spent a good amount of time on the enterprise user side of the table. So I've been on that position where it's my network is the one that's under threat, and I'm the one that's controlling and managing all those devices that went in there. And for me, one of the difficulties in modeling has been the shift to the cloud. Right? We expect at an enterprise level, and I know this doesn't always happen. We expect customers to have a lab, right? We expect new firmware to be vetted. We expect penetration testing to happen. We expect all these different things in the IT space when you have a lab that's on premises. And when we were securing things in our own data centers, when we were securing things in our own offices, it was relatively simple, right?
Mhm.
We had control over our firewalls, we had control over these different spaces. Now everything's shifted to the cloud. It's not you keep hearing, well, everything's going to everything's in the cloud. It's not going to the cloud, it's in the cloud. And the cloud is it's not a data center that's under your control. It's not a premise that you have direct access to. So it's when we're modeling these things out, when we're trying to figure out these vectors, it's a whole new environment sitting out there. And that's certainly one of the challenges that I'm coming across for a lot of my customers. And Paul's delved deep on the device side of the house
Mhm.
for some of these, and that's a whole other world to this.
Yeah, Garth, if I may just add a little bit to that. So when you're talking about at a product level,
Mhm.
threat modeling, we're really looking at data flow diagramming. So how data is moving from one system to another system or one application to another application, and then where attacks can happen, and really trying to understand that risk and how we can really prevent those risks. Right. So that's kind of the focus. So really understanding the data, how it's flowing, is a critical part of that assessment.
And when you move that out into the cloud, right, it becomes it's the same. Yeah, it's exactly it's the same thing, except now we're looking at data that's moving between virtual devices and virtual containerization and things like that, and you're now tracking flows through APIs, and so you've got whole different attack surfaces to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Lately I've been getting a little more into that. I think actually more on the cloud, like you said, it's a little more tricky, but it's a little more automated too. I'm using, frankly, Defender to start to learn about how our stuff is more vulnerable. But in terms of looking at other threat modeling, a lot of times what I do personally is I try to read the case studies and the news events and hear what's going on out there, and try to get my head around it, which is not easy to do because you have to every day learn about a new event that just happened. So trying to understand, those events and then which ones pertain mostly to you. A lot of times I have to use my imagination a little bit and say, okay, this happened with a PLC controller. Why couldn't it happen with an AV controller? That sort of thinking. And it's you have to kind of put on your bad actor hat a little bit and use your imagination sometimes.
Well, I think one of the difficulties to exactly what Paul said is that a lot of times in the AV space and other spaces, but anytime we're dealing with devices, I think a lot of times, while the manufacturer may know what's under the hood, the rest of us may not, whether it's on the integrator side or the end user side. We understand that, well, this device, does this and, it speaks these protocols that we deal with in our daily life. But do we understand the underlying operating system? Do we understand, which Debian kernel, which Linux kernel is running on this? Do we understand, what different, what daemons are running on that software? So you may see something that comes out saying, hey, this is a security alert for this flavor of Linux. And you may say, well, I don't care about that. Well, are you certain that you don't have a controller in your conference room that's running that version of Linux and has now become a jump box for a bad actor? And so it's security through obscurity. I know is an old saying, but you can also have threat through obscurity as well, and that ignorance can kill us.
So I think I'm going to jump on the word ignorance right now because that's usually my favorite segue into cybersecurity conversations. Because as we know, a lot of the challenges that we see in the cybersecurity space happens because of the lack of information. So I was listening to this conversation that we were having as a group of SMEs who understand the cybersecurity space. And within the first 15 minutes, we've scared the bejesus out of every single AV professional out there who wants to hear anything about cybersecurity. And the end result of this conversation is, I'm never going to learn that. I'm never going to do that. I'm just going to hand it over to someone. And that is where cybersecurity awareness fails. So part of my challenge and part of my job is to make sure that we humanize the concept of security. Now, first off, I know we talked about definitions, but I'm always going to be this teaching person who likes to say and define things just to simplify things, because we as an industry are very smart. We're very capable. We've come up with amazing solutions over the years. But right now we're overlapping into another group who's been doing this for a while. That's where our challenge lies. Cybersecurity, as the name suggests, does not just pertain to cyber-related events. It's anything that requires security. It is the new terminology that encompasses everything, all the way from physical security all the way up to cloud computing and IoT and network-based security. So where are we as an industry in terms of learning what cybersecurity is? This is our challenge. Now, what is our starting point? We can't just assume that we know things and just do things. I think the first step is building what I like to call a security posture. Security posture, as a simple definition, is something that shows an organization or a group of people their capability of dealing with threats. Very simple. And cybersecurity posturing usually has three main components to it. There's the people component, there's the process component, and there's the technology component. Now, the conversations that we've been having to this point largely surrounds the technology, and Iftekhar brings the process, because as an organization, as a manufacturer, they need to have a process for these things. But where we lack a lot of times is the people component, not because of the people themselves, but the investment into it. Now, I'll give an interesting stat. I've read a lot of surveys and people trying to understand, where does the cybersecurity education fall on? How do we get it across? And there's been an interesting stat that I've seen. Usually, any organization that invests into security, the likelihood of them investing into technological advancements, which could be server upgrades, firewalls, or any of technology parts of it, it's usually 10 times more than what they invest into the individual. You want $1 million server? Sure, we can budget that next year. How about $300 for security plus training? Let me think about that, right? So this is the challenge we have.
Yeah.
Our mindsets need to shift, because as an industry, we are not going away from this. That supposed demarc point, which has been what a lot of AV companies have relied on over the years, is no longer existent. We are all part of a technology provider group. So we can't just go and say, that's not my job. It may not be your job, but the handoff needs to be better.
Mhm.
In order for that to happen, I think our focus lies on educating ourselves, and that needs to happen at every level. Whatever vertical you represent, whatever sort of provider you are, cybersecurity education is where our next investment, our next big investment needs to be.
So we have manufacturers and we have integrators on this call. We don't have an end user per se, but what I wonder we should be thinking about, to your point, the people, we're very good at designing systems. We're very good at installing systems and integrating them. Security now has to be an element that is part of that integration and that knowledge transfer that you just described, Frank. So where does the responsibility long-term for the security lie? The integrators have to build that into the system as any other element, but that has to be transferred over as a responsibility to the operator of the system, shall we say, not necessarily the end user who's actually, using it and pushing buttons, but the operator, the maintainer of that system. Is that something that we as integrators and manufacturers impart onto them or encourage them? I mean, eventually they have to run with it unless we're doing some sort of security as a service, maintenance program or that sort of thing. What you gentlemen, what's your take on that? Who owns it afterwards, and how do we make sure that they do it?
The problem with security as a service, and the problem, and Frank's entirely right. So I'll step back about 1.5 years when I was on the end user side of the house. And I was part of an IT department that was massive. 20,000 people, dedicated just to IT. Huge, like Fortune 15 level company. And the concern is not necessarily the tech. Frank's right. It's, I don't have to worry about getting through your firewalls if I can get to one of your employees. And it's a lot easier, frankly, to crack a human attack vector, so to speak. It's a lot. I was thinking about this. It's kind of fun. This actually had me up last night, and I was trying to think of an example version of an attack here, the kind of thing that keeps a CISO wide awake. And it's not hard, right? So let's say we have a cloud service out there for let's say a manufacturer that does, and this is in no way a slam on any manufacturers. I'm not going to name names necessarily, or anything like that, because this is a hypothetical, entirely hypothetical. But let's say we have a manufacturer out there that has room controllers and video systems and everything else, and they have a cloud service. And people wonder why they get these phishing emails, for example. So let's say that, I go on LinkedIn, I figure out a few people who work and might have access into this service who aren't necessarily security engineers. Maybe they're, kind of in the collab space. Maybe they're contract employees. And I send an email out tacking a 1, maybe at the end of the reply to domain on the email, asking them to, hey, your credentials for, XYZ cloud look like they've been compromised. Can you please go to this link? Now, most people are going to go, oh my God, that's a phishing attempt. Click it and throw it away. I don't need everybody to click it. I just need one person to do it. Mm-hmm. So they click it, they give me credentials, and I've got credentials for that cloud service. Now, what are the chances? And you might say, okay, well, having credentials for XYZ cloud service isn't going to get you a lot other than, look into a portal. What are the odds that credential is existing someplace else? What are the odds that I can take a credential that was used for an AV cloud service from manufacturer, and maybe that person is being lazy and that credential is now being used for Azure or for AWS. And now I have access into the cloud environment, and now I can really start to wreak havoc. And so it's that, and I never had to hack a firewall. I didn't have to boot up Kali. I didn't have to load up any tools. All I had to do was, rely on somebody who was underpaid and overtired and click the link. It's a lot easier to do that.
Yeah, good security hygiene is not a one-step process. It's not something that you can secure at a singular step and say, all right, you're secure. That never happens. Security is a growing landscape, which makes us have to constantly evolve and work on it. And just as in hygiene or a regular cleanup process, what do you do? I mean, I have little kids, and as parents, we clean up every week. What do? They do not clean up, and they mess their rooms up. We go back and tell them, you got to clean up. But we can keep telling them, or we can instill in them good practices that say, all right, this is the time you got to do this. And that is the conversational piece of security that we lack at times. How many times have you had an end user reach out and say, my security team is looking for particular information on your product. I need a document. I need some information on this. And what do AV integrators or manufacturers do? We hit them with a 60-page white paper that says it's all in there, right? Instead of just saying, it's just this. That's what you need. Right. Or if you need more, let's have a conversation about it. So we, at times, are shackled by our own lack of processes to be a part of a larger ecosystem that is security. We need to change that. And in order for that to change, every part of the process of the audiovisual industry, every person involved needs to have an understanding of security at some level. Not everyone needs to be a hacker. Not everyone needs to be a security ninja. But what you need to be is have an understanding of security. And that, honestly, for me, starts at the sales process, at the needs analysis phase of a project. That's when you start asking the security questions, not after it's a product and then you go and complain to the manufacturer saying, well, your product doesn't do this. Well, we didn't know that. And it was not us specifying it. It's the designer who specified it. Those questions need to happen. And it is a multi-step process that we just need to have better hygiene, a better understanding on.
Yeah,
well,
so
that's interesting. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a little bit onto that. So many times, I mean, AV industry, we feel like our products are used in conferencing and video walls and such a things like that. So why do you need to care much about security? But it's not like I'm not bringing down a data center. I'm not bringing down availability of critical systems. Why do you care? But the point here is all these devices are intelligent. They are connected in the network. So let's say you have a audio visual device in your data center or within your network, and it has access to your power distribution unit or UPS, right? So now compromising that audiovisual unit, they can also compromise your power distribution unit. So in that case, the power distribution unit is the source of powering up your servers and networking switches. So basically, you can think that by getting into that audiovisual product, they got into the PDU, ultimately brought down the entire network environment. So that's why you need to also think many times they are actually using the device as a launch pad to launch attacks to other more critical infrastructure.
And if I can just quickly go back to something Paul said at the beginning, and Iftekhar, you both mentioned threat modeling. So threat modeling is where you're trying to understand what's the potential for this. Threat modeling is an entire landscape. Like imagine you have like a 1,000-acre property, and what we're doing is we're just saying, I have really good gates on this property, so nobody's going to get in. But this is 1,000 acres. It's massive. You need to go back and understand the modeling and how it impacts. And that's where sometimes as audiovisual professionals, we lack the foresight to see that our products, it's not the direct impact of a hack or a failure that could necessarily impact the organization. It is a chain of events. And that is how threat actors work. It's not a singular event. It's about understanding that. And, Iftekhar, great point there. I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's something called the cyber kill chain. There's a few ways to model it. One is the MITRE attack, and there's something called the cyber kill chain, and then the diamond model, if you guys want to go look at that later, kind of thing. But it really is everyone's responsibility. And I think that I think what problem the AV industry has to start changing, and it is changing through discussions like this, is stop thinking it's just about network security and that network security is someone else's problem. Because as others have pointed out, phishing is the #1 threat to anyone, ransomware, and how people go about phishing through voice phishing. Phishing is, for anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about with a PH, is usually when you get an email saying, please click this link, and the link downloads some malicious stuff, or they somehow get your credentials from you. So phishing is a voice form of that. There's something called smishing, which is when you get a text saying, click this link. You guys are probably seeing more and more of those sketchy links, and they're coming through other channels too. So getting out of the mindset that it's just the network port and someone else's problem, and realizing that the humans are the vulnerabilities. And we're all subject to social engineering attacks, and those engineering attacks just keep changing. There's now MFA, which is multi-factor authentication. Fatigue attacks, that's a whole nother subject we can delve into, but getting back to, it's really everyone's job, and learning what your job is, the basics, learning how to protect your home office and your family network, the very basics of that, teaching your family about hygiene, and then bring that to the office, because it's all one thing, now. And learning just, simple attack vectors like USB keys, the amount of damage that can be done by putting one of these into your computer, ranges from just, destroying your computer to infecting it and taking it over and, passing the Stuxnet virus, like it's scary. And yet, I know people that have jars of these on their desk, and they really don't know where they came from.
Get given away at trade shows, right?
but to tie that to a human one, Paul, there was I wish I could remember the book it was in, but there was a book where it talked about, like, one of the consulting firms went in, and they went into a bank, and they posed as fire inspectors. They basically figured out what the building and fire inspectors for the municipality were wearing, dressed themselves similarly, and got lit into.
I just want to pause there. These are good guys posing as bad guys.
Yes,
right?
yes. These are good guys posing as bad guys.
Good people posing as bad people.
Being paid to do this by the leadership of the bank, and they got access. And of course, on what they do is they go through and pretend to do their fire inspection. They're taking USB keys, like Paul just showed, and as soon as that their escort's not watching, they're sticking it in the back of a computer, and then. What ends up happening is a couple of days later, then they give the reports to leadership and say, "Hey, look at the data that we collected, and here's how we did it." So they're specifically doing the attack as the good guys, so to block that from but again, it's a human factor. Right. And it's never just one thing. It's, the failure wasn't the fact of the software that was on the USB key. The failure was the fact that they got physical access into there in the first place. Which is why, how many of us have ID cards for offices, or at least did pre-pandemic, right? And how many times do we hear from people, don't let anybody tailgate you and things like that. I think back to one of my first jobs in this industry, and we all think about the electronic version of this, but I think back to one of my first jobs in this industry, and I was working for an integrator, and we had a manufacturer rep who used to work for the company, who tailgated somebody in, and he didn't get questioned because he used to work there. So everyone's like, "Hey, how you doing, so-and-so?" And what he did is he, was able to walk through the building with impunity, and he walked into the sales area and went up to desks that salespeople weren't at and figured out where his competitors were on bids. And, and this is pre-cell phone cameras, and noted down everything that we had that his competitors were working on. That's an information breach.
Yeah.
So we think that it's always high tech, but no, it could be somebody walking around with a notepad, just what's on the desk over there.
or
Let's
dumpster diving, as they call it.
Right.
Right. Let's take a look at a chart of some of the top 10 threats out there and kind of give people an idea of some of the things that they should be looking at. This comes from an insurance company that specializes in, insurance policies for cybersecurity crimes and cyber crimes. And we look at some of these top 10 cyber threats. Social engineering, this is one that we talked about. Third-party exposure, configuration mistakes, back to the equipment, having poor cyber hygiene. Cloud vulnerabilities. You mentioned before that a lot of our systems are cloud-based right now. Ransomware, clicking on something that we shouldn't be clicking on. Mobile device vulnerabilities, the Internet of Things, devices that we're just putting on the network to talk to other parts of the system. Poor data management and inadequate post-attack procedures. These are the top 10 cyber threats. This is from mbroker.com. And I find it kind of interesting how many of these, of course, intersect what we're doing here within AV. The other thing I find kind of interesting is that a lot of us have now moved into a home office environment. A lot of our customers' employees have moved into a home office environment. And I think exponentially the amount of cyber threats that are now there. I'm going to give my home as an example. So I oversee marketing and training in this office. The office next door is a finance manager who oversees all of the finances for the company that she works for. So now there's two critical elements there, pricing on my side, competitive, that sort of thing. And we're both using the same network, and both of our companies have to be concerned with what we're doing at home. How should companies be thinking about the security aspects of our homebound employees and those who are actually using, AV systems at home as well? Who wants to take that?
I can kick it off.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that we have planning and policies in place for things like that. You can't just expect people to do the right thing. That's the most important thing, because if you have data,
Mm-hmm.
data is the most valuable piece of all of this. If you look at any cybersecurity threat, yes, you can lose a piece of gear. You can have somebody break in and loss of equipment. But
Mm-hmm.
data is today's gold mine. That's what every attacker out there is trying to target. There are websites out there, if anybody's interested in researching, you can go and take a look at what simple things as your name and email address go for in the dark web. There are websites where you can purchase these things, which an email address is important. A phone number, even more. Credit card information. Hell yeah, now we're talking about the gold mines here. So it's important that organizations, as they try to adopt a more hybrid type of workspace, their policies need to be helpful. And at the same time, security has to find that balance. A lot of times, what I find with organizations is either they clamp down to the point where, what happens when people clamp down and you can't share a file anymore? He'll say, hey, quick phone call. My organization doesn't let me get any of these attachments. You mind sending this to my personal email? And everybody will be like, sure, I just want you to have the information.
Oh,
So
man.
therein, we've actually seen a flaw. And now, have we secured the organization? Yes. But what have you done? You've opened up an entirely new pathway of how a data breach could potentially happen. So security, humanizing security, I'll keep saying that point about the importance of us not just be the people who are out there to scare people, but also make this, from a user experience perspective, something that's doable, practical in a home environment. If you are concerned about the data that your employee is handling at his home, please make sure there's a policy in place where you pay for a separate internet connection just for the purposes of organizational use. Do not share that. Manage that. Network security can be adapted, but have a policy in place for that. How much do you value your data? There are several ways to do this, and there is no one good solution for it other than you being proactive as an organization to value your data and your employees and the process that makes it all fruitful.
The term I think I've heard for what Frank's talking about is called shadow IT.
Yep.
Yeah, when you restrict people from doing their jobs, yeah, that's exactly what you end up with. There's a great book out there. It's a few years old now, called Spam Nation. I don't know if anybody else here has read that one or seen it by, I think it was Brian Krebs. from Krebs on Security, who actually wrote it. And he went and interviewed a bunch of the literal bad actors from Eastern Europe and these other places where there's high concentrations of this, because people, I think, want to say, and Frank, you deal with the human aspect of this even more than I do. I think it's very easy though for people to say, well, I don't have anything of value, or this isn't, they think that this is a couple of kids in their basement doing this and there's nothing financially viable to this. If this wasn't a financially viable thing, they wouldn't be doing it. So I live in Minneapolis, and I mean, as everybody knows, we have a large retail company here in Minneapolis that has a bullseye as their logo, and had a massive retail breach. What was that now? Probably about 7 years ago, something along those lines. Time gets wibbly wobbly here with the pandemic, and everybody and all the news organizations made a big fuss about all the credit card data and all this other stuff that went on, but nobody really made a fuss except for a couple articles I saw about what the real payload from the real win from that hack was, and it was the customer information database. So this company is famous because they basically they do customer tracking, and a lot of large retailers do this. They do customer tracking at a level where they were able to figure out that a teenage girl was pregnant before her family, but before she told anybody, before there was any sign of this, and they did it by tracking her purchases. And so there was a big case study done, and you can go look this up. There was a lawsuit over this actually, where the father sued them, and. Yeah, it was a whole thing, but that's what that database contains, right? If I have a way of tracking you, if I have a way of tracking your actions, there are certain inferences I can make about you. Now that all that is data, and when a hacker, I mean, it's one thing to get your credit card number, but what happens when I get the essence of who you are? What happens when I now know not just your mother's maiden name, but what happens?
Your schedule for the day.
Your health.
Right. What? Yeah. Exactly. What happens when I know
habits,
what medications you take?
Appointment.
Right. Because all of that helps me either attack you or use that information. And you see what I mean? It can be worth things at so many different levels.
Everyone says they have nothing of value till you have a mortgage in another state. It's like that's when I have another house that somebody else is living in and paid for. That's identity theft right there. And that's why everyone has something of value. It's the mindset. We really need to work on establishing security as part of our lives. You have the biggest hack tool out there that is openly available to everyone today is Google. Your information is out there. We've gone past the point where you can control these things. Now it's up to us to kind of, as an organization, as an industry, as individuals, understand that we are all part of the security blanket.
And let's not leave out our clients. Like you said, they're not represented on this panel. Someone is an end user client in the comments for sure, and there's plenty of clients out there. I had this conversation the other day. Someone kind of commented that we're too small for anyone to worry about, kind of thing. And I was like, understand, you're not, they're coming after what was behind us. You showed that slide, the third party, oftentimes the AV is the third party, is the small vendor that is the backdoor to the bigger client. So
that retail,
that client security now extends not only to your network and your policies, but also, like you said, to the home network and to everyone that's working on it. So
that retail hack came in through an HVAC vendor.
Right, came through an HVAC, just so everyone's know. Yeah, Target was 2013. I looked it up.
Yeah,
this is when they started, and they came in through an HVAC installer, vendor, maintenance guy, person, stole their credentials to get into a network. When I first heard they came in through the HVAC system, I thought they climbed through the ducts. And there is some theory about that at first, but I guess it was more of a stolen login. A lot of people use the same login for personal that they do at work. There's some hack on some website, like, I don't know, insert your favorite hack, and they don't bother to change their password. So, you get the credentials, you're in, and then somehow the HVAC network, Mark, you can help me on this, I think was hooked up to the same network as the point of sale devices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's your
And so
internal.
what's really interesting about the target hack is it also wasn't just that the networks weren't segmented,
right.
that they actually were able to attack the sales devices that you run your credit card through.
Yeah, there's your technical failure, right? The
Just
fact
mind
that you,
blowing. So it's a mix
Yeah,
of it's always a mix of like social and technical, and
you
somebody
want to
had
know
just
why
changed their
we
password
scream
or not
about
leaked the
VLAN
password.
segmentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's
Right.
bring it
I'm
back
going off track
to
here. Let's get back on track.
that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But still, it's cogent to the conversation. Let's bring it back to the enterprise. So we have all of these sources of data within our enterprise. What do we do to make sure that internally people aren't getting more information than they should be getting? And how do we balance that with access to the information we should be getting? Paul, I think, we were talking last week about a procedure to make sure that we just start with the assumption that everything's hacked already or everyone's guilty.
Yeah, there's a newer trend in the industry. It's not new to cybersecurity people, but it's probably new to AV people. So I'll try to define it, called zero trust. And a lot of people just mark that up to, oh, that's a marketing term. Let me just explain what that is let me first explain what it's not. It doesn't mean you don't trust people. If you say you're implementing zero trust in your organization, it doesn't mean you're not trusting your coworkers. What I always like to say is you're just not trusting that they are using their own logins. That's the best way to describe it to people. Like, we're making sure it's you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your own, crimes are not, that's sort of but we're just zero trust is making sure it's you. And so we're not trusting that, when you log in that it's you. We're making sure, we're assuming breach, that your credentials have been stolen every day, that someone is in the network or at least has access to some credentials. And so we want to make sure it's you, and verify it's you using multi-factor, which is using your phone or a key fob or some other thing. We could look up multi-factor MFA. We can go on about that. We're going to run out of time, and then we're also looking at, limiting your access, which is called least privilege. And what that is saying is, you as an employee, we're going to give you the tools that you need to do your job and the data that you need, and that's it. You're no longer going to have, even just going back a few years, there's enough people on this call, you guys all remember this. When you first got your job, when I first got my job in the industry, it was, here's a key to the door and here's a code to the alarm panel. And so that knew it was me, in theory, using that code and coming in the door. And then it became a card key, and then it was card keys, within the building. And then, well, how do I know it's me using my card key? Okay, now there's a camera, and now you can add a guard and biometrics. It's all making sure it's you, and no longer are we just letting you in the door and giving you access to everything in the building. Now we're letting you in the door and only to your desk, basically, data wise. We're not letting you go have access to the giant filing cabinets. Remember, I don't know if you guys still have these, but I remember rooms of filing cabinets with everyone's folder in them, and anyone could walk in. I always love the analog analogies to digital. Anyone can walk in, open a drawer, pull out the blue folder, probably, right? I see some smiles, the blue folders. And have access to it. We can't let that happen. Did anyone ever think, oh, I could light a match and burn this room down? No, because most people don't think that way. But we kind of have to start thinking like that. How bad can it get? Put on your bad actor hat for a minute. Put on your malicious actor hat. Have those discussions. How bad can it get? And then put in those locks in all the doors, and
That's exactly right. I mean, you can't in the past, prior to zero trust, and this is something that I guess audiovisual professionals and IT professionals of the past are more used to, is we used to talk about defense in depth, right? We used to have a layered approach. All right, so this is what we're doing here. This is what we're doing here. This is what we're doing here. Zero trust essentially blows that out and says, we're going to implement different security policies at each level of the conversation. So yes, we now have card readers, we have security cameras, we have RFID, it's a combination of different things that makes zero trust a very successful way of approaching things. And that leads to different design challenges for us, primarily with microsegmentation. We're dealing with an industry that's still can't get the difference between a VLAN and a subnet. And now we've moved on into challenges like, all right, now you're putting AV devices into networks that are undergoing zero trust policies. They have microsegmentation. It requires a lot of learning for our our doers of the industry on the network and the network security side of things.
Yep.
Yeah, and policy being, I mean, such a key word, right, when we're talking zero trust, because in a lot of cases it's no longer that we're relying on what's on a box for security, right? There is oftentimes I did Fed work for about 14 months here before going to Yorktel. And in the Fed space, you're dealing with zero trust, and in collaboration, you're dealing with policy servers, right? You have dedicated boxes that are, I don't want to say self-governing, because I guess that's not entirely the phrase I'm looking for, but it's a policy-based system, and it's basically it's a series of if this then this, right? If if this happens, it's like if this happens, I'm going to segment it this way. And by the way, if this happens and I detect this condition, I may be segmenting this even more and throwing these over here. So there's more than just what I'm setting up on the box. And I see so many manufacturers doing things like, hey, look, we support network access like 2.1x or this other things. That's great. So how are you going to work with the policy server that your customer has actually running its network and running its systems? So it's this is going to get into the AV is IT or not discussion. I think I know where pretty much everyone on this call lies, and I'm not going to poke that bear too hard. But you live within the IT framework, and if you don't know what your customers are doing and you're not aware of this stuff, you're gonna get stuck. Yeah.
To tell you what, let's we've covered a lot of topics, and I think we've given our guests a lot of things to think about. In the few moments that we have left, let's kind of go around the horn really quick and give me a sense of where you think the cybersecurity trends are for the remainder of this year, but also going into next year, and things that we need to think about. So let's start with Paul. Kind of give us a sense of what's next for cybersecurity, things that we need to think about, things that we need to do.
What I'm seeing happening is there's a big push. I don't know if it's relevant to AV, but to me it is, because it's a push for MFA, multi-factor authentication, on everything. And so that doesn't mean just your computer, but also on your mobile devices. There's a big push to secure mobile and all the apps, because part of working from home and remotely is now we're more and more reliant on mobile. And so that's even further one step away from what most people think about when it comes to cybersecurity or network security. People have a lot of faith that their phone is secure, and learning that that's not is going to be a big part of it. So I'm seeing that push happen for sure. I'm sure I'm blanking for a second. Anyone else? Any other trends?
Iftekhar, what's your take on trends going forward?
From the product security, I think everyone has learned, right? Like, it's very easy to break a system. I mean, you can just think about only a few vectors, but again, there are a lot of wide open spaces that we have not thought about, that we have not encountered. So really, at the product level, like making sure like we sign our code and then we have a secured boot in that product can help to prevent or mitigate many of the issues that we are seeing currently. And that's being a kind of a all the time when we're trying to sell our product, our customers are also asking, how do I know like you have the firmware that's given by Panduit or Athlon are running on this system, right? And nobody has modified that. So those two are big areas for us to focus on.
Frank, what's your take?
I think the evolution of cloud is going to be affecting the audiovisual industry more and more. There are going to be different parts. Right now, cloud deployments primarily focus on the control side of things because it's easier from a data traffic perspective. But with all the advances that's happening, with the organization that I represent and, other standard bearers out there, what we're doing is there's going to be media that goes to the cloud as well. Once that happens, it'll require us to understand a little bit more advanced things about how cloud security works. Again, the principles of security will still remain the same, but I think that's the fact that the cloud is going to be a part of everything everything that we do is a future trend for me. And again, I'm very passionate about IT things, so obviously I'm going to look forward to these things. And at the same time, I've also had people say that the security thing is becoming too hard for us. We might actually step it back and not go to network technologies. We're going to just use the traditional non-network things. And you know what? If that works for you, that is also an approach to do it. I'm not opposed to that.
Mark, what's your crystal ball telling you?
I saw I saw Evan's question, and it's perfect because it ties right in there. And Evan, I wish I had a good answer for you. But I think that's a discussion that needs to, that needs to continue. Because that's to me, that's the challenge that the pandemic brought on us. And it's a thing that's in the room that hasn't been addressed yet properly. I don't think we've seen the harm that's probably been done already from the work from home. But along with what Frank said about the move to the cloud on the infrastructure side and the back end of the house, now on the end user side of the house, we're having to think about how to secure someone's bedroom, right, or somebody's home office or someone's dining room, and that's a world I don't think that most manufacturers or most end users or anyone was ready for. So I think we're going to see a larger focus on that. And I also think that we're going to see some damage. I'm going to be the pessimist. I think we're going to see some damage coming out of that as well.
Well, I think with awareness comes the opportunity to be prepared. And if we've done anything today, the four of you on this conversation, I think we've brought awareness to the importance that the AV team and the AV team, IT team, and the end user have to have a conversation with every system that's gone in and every system that's going in. Understand how we're going to secure this system on its own and how we're going to secure it and keep it from an entry point for the rest of that customer's network. So I think that's the important thing that we need to think about. And I want to thank you gentlemen. That's going to take us to the end of our time. I appreciate all of you taking your time to sharing your expertise and for this spirited conversation this early in the morning for some of us on the West Coast. And I want to single out Paul for reaching out after our first Hub live stream and suggesting this topic and these great panelists. And let's talk about the panelists. If you'd like to get a hold of any of our panelists, we're going to put some information on the screen, starting with Iftekhar. He is joining us from Panduit, and you can see his contact information there on LinkedIn, as well as his other points of contact there. And then we'll bring up Paul's information. If you'd like to reach out to Paul, you can find him at Level 3 Security. You could also find him via his LinkedIn handle there and his email. Also, my thanks to Frank over at Audinate. Thank you for joining us, and where you can get a hold of Frank on his LinkedIn and his Twitter and his email. And of course, Mark, thank you very much for joining us as well. Your contact information is on the screen or coming up on the screen for Mark. Maybe we have a lockout there. We'll make sure that his information, along with everyone's information, is available on the YouTube playback for this. So we'll have a chance, so that you'll have a chance to reach out to any of our panelists if you want to continue on this conversation or any conversation. Quickly, I'd like to thank the production crew for keeping the signal streaming and wrangling all the social media channels and the questions that have come in. All of us here at Lona and Panduit thank you for watching. Flick that like button and subscribe to the channel you're on so that you can be sure to share your comments and we can get back to you if you have any specific questions for our panelists. And if you'd like to see any other topics here on the Hub, we'd like to hear from you on that as well. So if there's anything else that we can do for you, please reach out to my guests or myself. We're happy to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time here on the Hub.